nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram itam Sri Radhika prana nata pada surojayo yena premanubhutyasya dattam tam Shri Gurum bhaje Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Bilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Kotha Mahamrita Payora Shomura Kelato Bande Bhagavatani Man Anulavam Mṛduni Patyakshito Namah Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupadi Kripakrite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupo Bhut Tanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Adadana-strīṇāṁ dantoir yacheham puna puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhulisyam Janma Janmani Abhira Pali Patiputra Kanta Dasya Bilashati Balashvavara Sri Rupa Chintamala Sapti Sangsto Matsvanta Durdanta Haichurastam Raganugami bhajano lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya sahasara smaratam prajandhum Shri Rupa pada kamala shrita chetasam me Chittam satam marukari yatupada padme Bhaktirya nikilarta varga jananiya brahma sakshat krite Anandatishaya prada vishayajat sukyat vimuktiryaya Shri Radha Ramanam padam bhajayugam yasya mahanashrayo Yakarya vrajalokavat gurutara premnaiva tasyai namah Yaramya nikila ghasanga shamani shrutra tritim sangata Yasvadya rasikai sukabdi janani dhikarya mukti spriham Yadhyata hridaye vrajendra tanuja premamrita syandini Saji yadhari bhakta vrinda mohita Dhanye Padyavali. By the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana Prayojana-avatar Prema Purushottam Karuna Mahasagar Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnavacharyas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire on this earth, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pad. Again, today we continue our discussion of Padyavali. And in particular, we pick up in this section discussing the entreaties or prayers made at the time of offering. And we're looking at this prayer where the poet has said, as you took pleasure in the offerings of the wives of the brāhmaṇas and of Sudama, then may you also take pleasure in my offering as well. So related to that, last time we started the discussion of Sudama, or Sridama, depending whose version you take, which is given in the 80th and 81st chapter of the 10th canto. So we got to the point of him arriving in Dwaraka, and the point coming up to the time where his offering is about to enter the scene, so to speak. He's come, but he feels too shy to offer his offering after seeing what it's like in Dwaraka, so he hesitates to offer it. And now we'll see how Krishna responds to this hesitation. So first, we covered last time this statement that Krishna makes, which is also found in the Bhagavad Gita, where he says that even a fruit, a leaf, a fruit, a flower, water, etc. is pleasing to me when given to me by my bhakte who has no desire of anything but bhakti. And we looked at comments on that, and specifically where Jiva Gosvami explained that it's not the mantra that makes the offering work. And it's not the ritual or the expertise in the ritual that makes the offering an offering, but it's the bhakti with which the offering is made, which is really what induces Bhagavan to accept it. And even if the execution of the ritual is flawed, that doesn't mean that it's not pleasing to Bhagavan. So we left off with this statement that's quoted in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, where Bhagavan is bhava-grahi. He is a relisher of bhava, and whether someone makes an offering to him accurately declining the name Vishnu according to the rules of Sanskrit grammar or not, the effect is the same. So, we'll start fresh off the top of the new file, where we'll continue to look at how this Leela goes in the Bhagavatam, and I've drawn out, Sri Goswami, Sanatana Gosvami, Jiva Gosvami, Chakravarti Pad, numerous points that they make in this section of their commentaries, which give us a richer picture of what's going on, so to speak. So, despite this being Bhagavan's disposition, and despite his assuring Sudama of this, Sudama still feels embarrassed to offer Sri Krishna the broken flat rice he has brought as a gift. Thus, he simply hangs his head in response to Krishna's request for the broken flat rice. Sri Krishna perfectly understands how Sudama feels at this moment, yet also wishes that nevertheless the original resolve Sudama made to offer the broken flat rice as he left home would be fulfilled. So as we discussed last time, when he was leaving and he thought, I need to bring some kind of gift, and then his wife went and begged these few handfuls of flat rice, and he thought, okay, I have a gift, I'm going to offer this. So Krishna was a witness to that resolve that Sudama made in his mind at that time. So Krishna wants to cause that resolve to prove true. So that's explained in this next passage in the Bhagavatam. So we have here, Sarva bhutatma drik sakshat tasya-gamana karanam vigyaya chintayanayam shrikamo ma bhajet pura patna pativratayas tu sakha priya chikirshaya praptomam masya dasyami samparo martya durlabaha itam vichintya vasanat chirabaddhan dvijanmanaha swayam jahara kim idam iti prituka tandulan nan vetad upanitam me parama priyanam sake tarpayantyangam vishvam ete prituka tandula. Being himself the seer of the minds of all entities, and understanding the reason for Sudama's arrival, Sri Krishna thought, quote, Sudama has not worshipped me in the past out of desire for wealth. That is, he has always worshipped me only for the sake of friendship. And now, this friend of mine has reached me because of his devout wife's desire to render pleasing service. In other words, sometimes his wife is said to have been named Sushila. So Sushila, there was nothing in the house with which she could serve her husband, so this caused her pain. So she wanted some means by which she could serve, and thus prompted Sudama to come to Dwaraka. So Krishna understands that Sudama has come at his wife's prompting, and not because he himself covets wealth. Thus, Krishna speaking, I shall bestow upon him riches that are difficult to attain even for the immortals. Thinking thus, Sri Krishna himself snatched from the garment of the twice-born the dried flat rice bound in a strip of cloth, saying, "What is this?" "This rice brought for me by you is certainly highly pleasing to me. Oh dear friend, this dried flat rice satisfies me, I who am the universe." In other words, "You didn't bring anything for me?" "Yes, you did, I can tell. What do you have here? I'm very happy to have this. Why do you hesitate to give it to me?" Sri Chakravarti Pad clarifies Sudama's intention in coming to meet Sri Krishna in Dwaraka at this time as follows. So I'll just read the translation here. So he's raising a contention, saying, well, the unsought secondary attainment of even a desireless bhakta, which they acquired by the grace of Sri Bhagavan as a result of their bhakti, is certainly enjoyment of excellent objects of the senses. So, in other words, this is someone who's hearing this narrative who thinks, okay, maybe Sudama didn't want wealth, but he worshipped Bhagavan and he got wealth. Maybe it was a secondary result, but nevertheless, if you worship Bhagavan, you're going to end up getting nice stuff. Someone might think that this is what the whole narrative here in the Bhagavatam is trying to teach. So, this contention is addressed as follows. No, that is not always the case. In other words, it's not a guarantee that everyone who worships Bhagavan is going to be given material opulences, or that you can reason from someone having material opulences that these are the grace of Bhagavan upon them. That is not the case. So he adds, in accord with a desireless bhakta's type of disposition, the unsought secondary attainment they acquire by the grace of Sri Bhagavan as a result of their bhakti to him may be twofold. In other words, there's no one rule in this regard. How does Bhagavan grace his bhakta? He graces his bhakta based on that bhakta's mentality, based on the personal character of that bhakta. So, thus there are two types, or, as it's broadly categorized here, ways by which Bhagavan may bestow his grace. So, quote, destined and non-destined enjoyment of objects of the senses. Meaning, some desireless bhaktas acquire enjoyment of excellent sense objects as an unsought secondary result of their bhakti to Bhagavan, and some alternately do not. So, Bhagavan gives this grace, his grace in the form of nice objects of the senses to some bhaktas, but not all bhaktas, and he differentiates based on the mentality of the bhaktas. Enjoyment of objects of the senses shall certainly not come about for one who has only aversion to any form of enjoyment of objects of the senses, on account of observation of such in the case of Bharat and others. So we hear in the 5th canto about the case of Bharat Maharaj, who was the king of all of the Indian subcontinent, but then rejected the whole thing and went off to the bank of the Gandaki and did bhajan in seclusion in a very renounced manner. So Bharat had this aversion to worldly opulence or fine worldly things. And after, in his 3rd birth as Jud Bharat, he roamed the earth as an apparent ignoramus and was extremely detached from all things. So this was the mentality of Bharat. So when Bhagavan wanted to bless Bharat, he didn't bless him or favor him with objects of the senses, because that wasn't the way Bharat's attitude was. It wasn't his disposition. Whereas that is, enjoyment of objects of the senses, shall indeed come about for one who has neither aversion to nor desire for that, on account of observation of such in the case of Prahlad and others. So then you see the case of Prahlad Maharaj later in the 7th canto, where there's no doubt that has profound fixity upon Bhagavan and is so resolute in his fixity that even death is inconsequential to him and so forth. And Bhagavan blesses him with the status of being a ruler of a massive kingdom for a prolonged period of time. So a very different response. In other words, in the case of Bharat, no worldly wealth was given at all. In the case of Prahlad, profuse wealth was given. So Chakravarti Pad is inferring from this that Prahlad wasn't actually averse to the royalty in which he was born or the royal opulence in which he was born, but he wasn't attached to it either. Could be there, could not be there. So Bhagavan gave it to him because it wouldn't bother him. In other words, it was, it didn't clash with Prahlad's mentality. But in the case of Bharat, it would have, so he didn't. Thus, because Sudama had lived a life of poverty up to this time that he meets Sri Krishna in Dwaraka, it can be inferred that this Brahmana, namely Sudama, had only aversion to enjoyment in his birth prior to this one, since he would have been granted some excellent objects of the senses if he did not have such aversion. And he came to Dwaraka only because of the request of his wife and because of his intense desire for the sight of Bhagavan. That is, he did not come to meet Sri Krishna in Dwaraka out of any personal desire for wealth, or for any excellent objects of the senses, since it is understood that he was averse to such things. So Chakravarti Pad is applying this and saying Sudama, he was of the averse category. Some bhaktas may harbor some aversion to worldly things, some bhaktas may be neutral to them. What is the central characteristic of the bhakta? Krishna nishta, fixity upon Krishna, akantita, one-pointedness upon Krishna. And that one-pointedness might be coupled with some aversion to the things of the world that are non-Krishna, or it might be accompanied with neutrality towards them. In either case, the defining characteristic, the essential characteristic, is the Krishna nishta. And whether or not there's actual aversion to the things of the world or not, doesn't have any direct bearing on the purity of the bhakti. Because it's not that we'll say, Bharat was a more pure bhakta than Prahlad or something like that. Because, he didn't have he had such aversion to worldly things. No one says that. Prahlad is championed everywhere as, the purest of the pure. And yet Chakravarti Pad is saying, but he had no aversion to even, royal opulence. So this is a nice point to show that Bhagavan's grace is always specific to its recipient and that not all bhaktas have the same mentality. So when we hear these accounts in the Bhagavatam or we hear about the lives of various Mahatmas, it's not necessary to always universalize things that are said there. In other words, some aspects of certain narrations may apply to persons of a specific mentality, but may not apply to persons of another mentality. So this is very insightful observation from Chakravarti Pad. Sri Jiva Pad, elaborating on comments of Sri Sanatana Pad, states in regard to the aforecited verses, that Sri Krishna seeks to assure Sudama that these palmfuls of broken flat rice, which Sudama brought for him, are not unfit for him, and rather are indeed a worthy gift for him, because they are highly pleasing to him. So in other words, when Krishna was saying the verses that we quoted a minute ago, what is this rice? It's so pleasing to me. He's trying to make Sudama understand, no, I really actually am pleased with this rice. Don't think, I'm here in a palace and I have all these fine delicacies and, royal cuisine and this is, a disturbance to have to eat some dry rice. No, it's actually pleasing to me to eat this rice. So Jiva Gosvami is taking it like that. Sri Krishna refers to Sudama in these verses as a friend. So he addresses him saying, "Oh friend," which, is a tactic in communication, even in, common, worldly language. Sometimes if you're trying to politely get someone's attention who keeps talking too much, say their name, like, hello, so-and-so, and usually they'll pause when they hear their name, so, and then if you're talking to someone, if there's some question about, or you want to emphasize a certain aspect of the relationship that you have or a certain emotion that you feel for them, then you might speak in a way to highlight that. So this is how he's taking, that Krishna addresses him, my friend, my friend, your rice is pleasing to me. So by calling him friend, he's trying to highlight that you're my friend, so what you give me is pleasing to me. Don't think about the content of it. Think about our relationship. So Sri Krishna refers to Sudama in these verses as a friend to convey that this rice is pleasing to him simply because Sudama, his friend, has brought it for him. And to ensure that Sudama doesn't worry about his offering being only a meager quantity of broken rice, Sri Krishna adds that this rice can satisfy the entire universe, since it is satisfying to himself, he who is the self of the entire universe. So when he's saying, this is pleasing to me, and then he calls himself the universe, this is how he's extracting the implication of that, and saying, you might think this rice is like nothing, and only some grand royal offering could please me, but actually, this is very pleasing to me, and by pleasing me, the whole world is pleased. So this rice is of immense value. This rice can, bring joy to the world. Don't think little of this rice. So then, the Bhagavatam goes on as follows. Iti mushtim sakrid jagva dvitiyam jagdhum adade tabat tri jagrihe hastam tatpara parameshtinaha ita vatalam vishvatman sarva sampat samriddhaye asmin loke tavamush min pumsam tvat toshakaranam. Then Sri Krishna ate one palmful of the rice and picked up a second to eat it. But beforehand, that is, before he could do that, Shri, namely Rukmini, being devoted to him, grabbed the Supreme Lord's hand and said, this much is sufficient, O self of the world. Your satisfaction is the cause of an increase in all riches for a person in this world and the next. So now this is something the commentators really get into here, is why does Rukmini grab his hand? What is the significance of Rukmini's gesture? So let's examine this. Sri Samipad comments in this regard that Rukmini's intention here is to convey to Sri Krishna, quote, your eating just one palmful of this rice is more than sufficient to ensure that Sudama attains in this life and the next all types of riches, which are just playful manifestations of my sidelong glances. Please do not make me subservient to him by eating this second palmful. So this is, that's as far as he goes. So why would Rukmini become subservient to Sudama if Krishna ate the second handful? Then I understand it like this, that she means to say, since you will have to give even me away to him if you consume the rest of this rice, that is the totality of the wealth he possesses, because you will have to give him the totality of your wealth in return to aptly reciprocate with his offering. So Sudama has nothing, he didn't have anything to give. His wife begged for these 2 palmfuls of rice. That's all he brought, so this is all his wealth. So if Krishna accepts an offering that amounts to the entirety of his wealth, and then Krishna is going to want to reciprocate with that, and Krishna isn't going to reciprocate insufficiently, and knowing Krishna, he likes to reciprocate more than sufficiently, then Krishna is going to have to give away the entirety of his wealth in return. This is because wealth is not measured in this context by its, volume in the regard to a third party's quantification, but it's measured in terms of the percentage of what one possesses. So because Sudama has given something that might be objectively of little value, but is nevertheless 100% of what he owns, then Krishna, might easily give something of far greater value, but it might be a very meager percentage of what he actually possesses. So to truly reciprocate, he can't just give a little that circumstantially happens to be more, but he has to give something of equal proportionate degree, which would mean he would have to give away everything he has. And Rukmini regards herself as belonging to Sri Krishna, so she thinks, I'll also have to be given away if you eat this palmful of rice. So don't go that far. Don't take everything that he has, just take half and then give him plenty in return, and that'll be more than enough for him. And it won't require you having to give everything away, including me. So this is how Sudama takes it. I'm reminded, I remember it once in church as a kid, hearing some story. I mean, this is, I don't know, 8 years old when I heard this, so I can't claim that it's accurate, but I just remember some story where Jesus or some of his followers are begging alms, and then they're given different amounts, and then one old widow gives them a very small thing, and then some of the followers, they say, oh, she gave so little. And then Jesus says, no, she gave the most. And they were like, what? And they were like, she just gave you everything she has. But these other rich people, they just gave you a few coins, which is nothing to them. So she's actually the person who's given the most. She'll actually be, rewarded the greatest, something like that. So that same concept of the proportion of giving with respect to the percentage of one's wealth is much more significant than giving just an external quantity of wealth if one happens to possess a lot. So this is how Samipad reads the intent of Rukmini's gesture. Sri Sanatana comments that Rukmini considers there to be no need for Sri Krishna to eat a second palmful of the flat rice, because the cause of Sri Krishna's becoming satisfied, bhakti, itself leads to an increase in all riches. Meaning Sudama's bhakti itself, and not the amount of rice Sri Krishna eats, will cause Sudama to attain all riches in this world and the next. And thus, although it was befitting for Sri Krishna to eat one palmful of the rice Sudama brought as a gesture of friendship, there is no need for him to eat any more of it. So this is how Sanatana is seeing it, that Rukmini knows that Krishna has such love for Sudama, regards Sudama as such a dear friend, is so pleased by Sudama's offering, is very delighted to eat this bit of rice that he brought, and that Sudama has shown such bhakti for Krishna, so complete. In other words, you don't have to eat the whole thing, there's no need. The gesture, the exchange, everything has been fulfilled, so that's fine, leave it at that. Everything is fulfilled already, you don't have to go further. This is how Sanatana Gosvami reads the intention of Rukmini. Sri Jiva comments that, quote, all riches, or sarva sampat here, refers to all purusharthas, including that of prema for Bhagavan. And since Sudama had already greatly pleased Sri Krishna, and thus ensured that he would receive an increase in all such riches for himself, Rukmini considered that there was no need for Sri Krishna, who is her sole and ultimate shelter, to endeavor to grant Sudama any further increase in riches, which are attained just by a glance from the form of Lakshmi, who is the overseer of all worldly riches, and a semblance of a partial manifestation of Rukmini herself, by means of eating another palmful of Sudama's rice, which had been brought by him for Sri Krishna with paramount bhakti. So in other words, Rukmini is here, in one sense, Jiva Goswami is seeing it that she has a certain awareness of her own Aishvarya, if you will. So she can see the beauty of this whole exchange, she can see the depth of Sudama's bhakti, she can see the extent to which Krishna is pleased by it, and to give Sudama all, wealth in order to fulfill the desire of his wife and so on, that I can do with an effortless glance of my eyes. So, you don't have to go any further with it. I get it. I see the whole exchange. I understand. Let him be blessed with this. That's enough. Something like this is how he takes it. So Rukmini said this with the understanding that Sudama would receive this increase in all riches later upon returning to his home. In other words, it's all in hand. We've got it all set up. Something like this. And also this point that here riches doesn't only refer to literal riches, but rather to purusharthas. This is also an insightful point of Jiva Gosvami because, if you look at, conventional like Hindu cinema where this type of Leela is depicted, usually it's sort of with a focus on the fact that Sudama actually got wealth in the end. So that even when wealth is being talked about here, it's not just material wealth, but it's principally immaterial wealth, or prema, which is really what is even being referred to by the concept of wealth here. That also, adds a layer of depth to the narrative. Then, so we've got 3 commentators. Now, Chakravarti Pad is always ready to further complement the tradition here. So, Sri Chakravarti Pad comments in this regard that by grabbing Sri Krishna's hand with her own hand, Rukmini conveys to Sudama that her intention in checking Sri Krishna from eating any more of the flat rice is to convey to Sri Krishna, quote, "Don't eat the second palmful of dry flat rice. If you eat the entirety of this wonderful substance that has come from your friend's house, then what will I divide up and give to my daughters, co-wives, maidservants, and self? Not even 1 grain of the rice will be had to apportion. That is, there will not be any remnants left for us to savor." In other words, don't eat it all. If you eat it all, we don't get to eat any. How am I going to divide this up and share it with everyone if you eat it all? Don't eat it all. So, a very nice, practical consideration as well. But Chakravarti Pad has layers of meaning. So this is the first instance. In other words, when Rukmini grabs Krishna's hand, then her intent is she's trying to indicate to Krishna, don't eat it all because you won't leave any remnants for us. But she also simultaneously conveys to her friends another intention she has in stopping Krishna from eating any more of that should be the rice. So in other words, she's grabbing Krishna's hand, so Chakravarti Pad is taking it that she's making eye contact with Krishna while she's saying this, but she's also casting a glance to her other companions here in her room, and with her glance to the companions, she's also conveying something else. So to them, it's as though she's intimating, these hard, dry, flat grains will hurt the most tender belly of my husband. In other words, I can't have this type of improperly prepared food going into the belly of my husband. I don't like that. That's unpleasant for me to think of the unsettling nature of the content. So yes, let him have some to have this loving exchange, but not too much. We don't want to cause any indigestion. And then to her beloved Sri Krishna himself, she also mentally conveys yet another intention she has for stopping him from eating any more of the rice. So now there's another layer of significance that she's also conveying to Krishna, that this much is enough, so be satisfied with just this much. There is no need to eat a second palmful. O soul of the world, when you are satisfied, the world shall be satisfied. In other words, she's saying, if you're already pleased, and that's everything. So, let it be. Then it is as though Sri Krishna objects. So when she's looking at Krishna saying like this, saying, save some for us, and you're already happy, so everything is already fulfilled, then Krishna is as if looking at her in back saying, to bestow great riches upon my dear friend, I should eat another palmful of his rice. No, let me eat more, because then I'll be bound to reciprocate further, and I really want to reciprocate with him. In other words, I'm really liking this. I really want to give Sudama a lot. So when Krishna gives this indication with his glance, then Rukmini in her mind telepathically says to Krishna, your satisfaction is the cause of a person's attaining all riches in this world and the next, and that has already come about. Therefore, don't eat any more of this dry, hard, flat rice. In other words, you're already pleased, you're already out of that satisfaction, you're already going to give Sudama so much. So there's no need to go any further with it. And come on, this is flat rice here, dry, it's not even cooked, let it be. So something like this, all these, layers of intent are drawn out. Then, following this exchange, Sri Krishna acquiesces to Rukmini's objection. Sudama then spends the night in Sri Krishna's palace, happily eating and drinking, and feeling as though he had gone to Svarga. The next day, without begging Sri Krishna for anything, Sudama returns home highly satisfied just by having had this personal meeting with Sri Krishna, wherein he observed Sri Krishna's devotion to brāhmaṇas, or his brahmanyata, and despite his great poverty, received the personal embrace of Sri Krishna, he upon whose chest Lakshmi Devi is ever present in the form of the Srivatsa. So in other words, for some pauper to walk in off the street and then being given this, the highest royal treatment for a distinguished guest, this on a social level is shocking. So, that Krishna showed the depth to which he valued their friendship, that despite the fact that by conventional social analysis, Sudama is no sort of dignitary that you would expect to be given this treatment, Krishna showed him all this, fine hospitality, such that he washed his feet and embraced him and so on. So Sudama is just melted. He's just so delighted to receive such affection and respect from Krishna. So as he's walking home, then he's reflecting on what happened. And these verses are Sudama's reflection. And the first one is rather well known. It's also quoted in the Charitamrita. Kwaham daridra papiyan kwa Krishna shriniketana brahmabandhuriti smaham bahubhyam parirambitaha nivasita priyajushte paryanke bhrataro yatha mahishya vijita shranto bala vyanjana hastaya shushushaya paramaya padasambhahanadibihi pujito deva devena brahma devena devavat svargapavargayo pumsam rasayam bhuvisampadam sarva samapi siddhīṇāṁ mūlam tatcharanarchanam adhano yam dhanam prapya madhyan uchair namam smaret iti karuniko nunam dhanam me burinadadat. Where am I, a pauper and sinner? And where is Krishna, the abode of all fortune? So this is a classic idiom in Sanskrit where locality is used in the case of comparison. In other words, it's not that he doesn't know where he is or where Krishna is, but what he's essentially saying is, who am I in comparison to him? Who, in English, the idiom would be more, who am I? I'm just a sinner, I'm just a poor person, and who is Krishna? He's the abode of all fortune, or the possessor of all fortune. Although I am merely a relative of brāhmaṇas, a brahmabandhu, that is, although I am not endowed with the qualities of a brahmana, and only treated as a brahmana because of my birth in a brahmana family, I have been embraced by his arms. I was sat by him like a brother on the bed used by his beloved. And being fatigued, I was fanned by his queen with a yak-tail fan in her hand. In other words, he sat me on his principal queen's bed and had his queen fan me. In other words, he's just shocked by this. In other words, that a poor man off the street would be brought in and sat on the queen's bed, and the queen would be made to attend to him. This is just marvelous. I was worshipped like a deva, with the highest attendant service of a foot massage and so forth, by he who is the deva of the devas and the deva of the brāhmaṇas. The worship of his feet is the root of a person's riches in svarga, in liberation, in rasa, and on earth, and of all siddhis. Thinking, upon obtaining wealth, this fellow devoid of wealth will become severely deluded and not remember me, Krishna, who is compassionate, did not give me even a little wealth. So this is Sudama's conclusion. In other words, he knows that Krishna saw his poverty, but Krishna still didn't give him anything. So he's not thinking, gosh, why didn't the Krishna give me anything? Just a few coins would be plenty. And he's not thinking anything like that. He's thinking, Krishna was so gracious to me, and Krishna can tell that if I get a bunch of wealth, I'm going to become, I'm going to lose the purity of my character. So out of his kindness, he didn't try to thwart me from that. He didn't try to delude me or give me something that would tempt me to lessen the rigor of my conduct and so forth. So this is Krishna's kindness upon me, that he didn't give me anything. He showed me so much respect, he showed me so much affection, and he didn't give me any wealth because he knows my mind. He knows that I'm, susceptible to these other temptations, and thus, really, he graced me, he favored me, he showed love for me so wonderfully. So he's floating, so to speak. He's walking home, on top of the world. He's just overwhelmed by the affection and respect and care that he received. After joyfully musing to himself in this way, and then arriving in the vicinity of his home, Sudama becomes awestruck to see that his homestead had transformed into an enormous palace filled with all varieties of opulence, as are found in Lord Indra's abode in Svarga. So he's already, so to speak, on top of the world and, just floating in this joyful, loved, wondrous feeling. And now he arrives home, and now he's even more filled with wonder. So what does he think then? Then these next verses depict that. So, nunam bataitan mamadur bhagasya shajvad daridrasya samriddhi hetu mahavibhuter avalokatonyo naivo papadyeta yaduttamasya nanva bruvano dishate samaksham yachishave bhuri-api bhuri-bhojaha parjanyavat swayam ikshamano dasharhakanam rishabha sakame kinchit karutyur vapiyat swadattam suhrit kritam phal vapi bhurikari mayopanitam pritukaika-muṣṭim pratyagrahit priti yuto mahatma tasyaiva me suhridasokya maitri dasyam punar janmani syat mahanubhavena gunalayena vishajjatas tat purusha prasangaha bhaktaya chitra bhagavan hi sampado rajyam vibhutir nasamartayatyajaha adhirga buddhaya vichakshana swayam pashyan nipatam dhaninam mahudbhavan. Bhata, in other words, a sound like, wow! Certainly there could be no cause of attaining wealth for this unfortunate perpetual pauper, myself, other than the glance of he of immense magnificence, the foremost of the yadus. In other words, he gets home, he sees this, and he thinks, nobody could have done this except Krishna. Certainly, the abundant enjoyer, the best of the dasharhas, my friend, personally seeing that I live in poverty and had concealed the thought of begging from him, but without speaking about that, granted indirectly this beggar, that is I myself, even in abundance of wealth like a cloud does so. That is, as a cloud grants an abundance of rain to the earth. He regards even something given by himself which is great to be small, and he regards even something meager given by a friend to be great. Thus he is of great nature, being filled with love. Thus he of great nature, being filled with love, accepted even a palmful of flat rice offered by me. Repeatedly in birth after birth may I have good-heartedness, companionship, friendship, and servitorship in relation to him alone. And may I have deep attachment to he who is the abode of all qualities and possessed of immense splendor. And may I have deep attachment to he who is an abode of all qualities and possessed of immense splendor. May I who have deep attachment to he who is the abode of all qualities and possessed of immense splendor, have full association with his persons, that is, his bhaktas. So I have deep attachment to him, and I pray may I also always have the association of his bhaktas. Wise and unborn Bhagavan, himself seeing the fall down of the wealthy, caused by conceit, does not grant variegated riches, a kingdom, or assets to a bhakta, lacking deep understanding. So, we'll look at the commentary on this verse. Sri Sanatana Pad comments in regard to these verses that Sudama speaks of Sri Krishna as, quote, my friend, because he had become inebriated by bhakti rasa, and thus out of an abundance of elation was considering himself to be very great, such that he spoke so as to show the extraordinary extent to which he personally had become an object of Sri Bhagavan's loving sense of mine, or mamata. In other words, my friend has done this, sort of like I'm up there on Krishna's level, Krishna, has such mamata for me. He holds me so dear. So he's so overwhelmed by this intensity that he speaks as if a little bit boldly in that respect. This is how Sanatana Pad reads it. Sri Jiva Pad comments that the illustration given of a cloud indicates that Bhagavan is an unconditional giver, just as a cloud sometimes appears without being requested and showers rain even without rumbling. So clouds, they come, they give their rain to everybody, and they come without being asked, they go when they wish. So something like that. Bhagavan, he gives his grace, it's indiscriminate. Even from the Vedantic commentarial traditions, a cloud is sometimes used for, as an illustration of something that is given or done unconditionally. So he's taking it here that the mention of Sudama's comparison of Krishna to a cloud means that Krishna has given this unconditionally, meaning despite my shortcomings or despite my, lack of worthiness, he's still given this to me of his own accord. Elaborating on the explanation given by Sri Samipad in regard to these verses, Sri Chakravarti Pad comments that, quote, the abundant enjoyer, without speaking about that, granted indirectly this beggar, even in abundance of wealth like a cloud does so, indicates that Sri Bhagavan engages in superlative enjoyment in comparison to all other beings by virtue of his being the beloved of Lakshmi. And thus after his dear friend Sudama gives him flat rice, which he regards as superior even to his own objects of enjoyment, and which Sudama obtained only after begging because he had an empty house, Sri Krishna feels that he should give Sudama something greater than his own objects of enjoyment, so that his reciprocal gift to Sudama is of greater value than Sudama's gift. Yet there is nothing that is of equal or greater value to his own objects of enjoyment. So this is quite interesting. In other words, Krishna is the ultimate enjoyer. He has the best of everything. So, but yet he thinks that what he's been given by Sudama is better than what he has. But what can he give back? There's nothing better than what he already has, but he needs to give something that he can feel is even better than that, because as it was said in the verse, where was it? That he regards even something given by himself, which is great, to be small, and he regards even something meager given by a friend to be great. In other words, because of his affection, his estimation of the value of his own things goes down, and his estimation of the value of what he receives goes through the roof. So now he's thinking, I have the finest of everything, but none of that is good enough, so what could I possibly give him? Thus, he feels unable to reciprocate as he wishes to, and embarrassed to grant Sudama only the relatively meager gift of an abode like that of Indra or Brahma. Out of such embarrassment, he grants this gift to Sudama only later, after Sudama leaves, without speaking about it directly in person. So he's taking it that Krishna feels shy to give Sudama only what the devas get. So because he was sort of shy to give it, he allowed it to be received later, because he felt it wasn't even worthy of giving it to him personally. He was ashamed in the sense of the magnitude of his gift. So this is a charming way of interpreting it from Chakravarti Pad. So anyway, this goes on for some time. We won't be able to finish it all today, so I think maybe I'll stop here, and we'll hear further significance of Krishna's gift of this palace and opulence to Sudama in our next reading. So if anyone has any comments, questions, corrections, or any other feedback, please feel free to share.
Can you hear me?
I hear you now, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, your mic is open.
It's like the internet is frozen. Oh, okay. No, I was just going to say this. Such a lovely story. I myself was one of those that used to believe maybe the gist of the story was some type of like Disney World like ending. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that Krishna is just so great. He's just so great. His love is so great that he takes whatever is given to him to be great. And that's like really the quality of a great being, that they take whatever, however little, however insignificant it may be in others' perception, but because it's given with this love, and that's the factor there, the love, the bhav, that Krishna takes it as like wow, and that nothing for him can even he feels like it's just barely reciprocal, right? And that's why like when Krishna tells the gopis, like, your service, I cannot replace. I'm indebted, because it's like, there's like nothing he can do, he feels, to replace or to reciprocate, right, that feeling that the gopis have towards him. So yeah, so Krishna is just really, really great. Thank you so much.
Jai. Krishna is Rasika Shekhar. He can relish the rasa, relish that love to such a great extent. That's a very nice point, a very nice parallel. So thank you so much for sharing that. All right, well, I think we can sign off here for today. And if we're so blessed, then in our next reading, we'll look at further significance of this exchange and conclude our discussion of Krishna's pleasure in Sudama's flat rice. Vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Radhe Shyam.